good energy in the room, lots of buzz, all of which is very positive. So for the final plenary session, Roy Tilley is going to be talking to us. Roy and I served together on the advisory board for Cool Choices, and it was through there that I thought, if we're looking for a plenary speaker that will be able to talk about issues that are impacting all of us, regardless of whether we're from business, academia, nonprofits, government, whatever it might be, how energy is priced for our institutions, our organizations, and what is likely to happen in the future is a topic that everyone would be interested in. Especially given the timeliness of the issue right now with the meeting in Paris, with the sort of what's going on in the utility sector within the state, with the Clean Power Plan rules. So there are lots of activity, there's lots of interest in utilities and what's happening. So looking around to try and figure out, well, is there someone in the state that could talk about this? The answer is pretty much no if you're looking within the utilities, because the utilities aren't talking right now. And so the benefit of having Roy is that Roy's retired. And is still very well connected, and still serves on a number of boards, but doesn't have the same limitations as somebody that's currently operating within the utility industry. So Roy Tilley is the former CEO of WPPI. He's been retired for a couple of years, but is very active in this whole energy, sustainability, environment field, and still very interested in what's to come and how do we get from where we are to where we're going. So join me in welcoming Roy Tilley to the stage.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for all the work that you do with this organization, and particularly thanks to everybody out there for the work that you do on sustainability. It's extremely important. Tom asked me to do some observations on what's happening in the industry, the challenges out there, and the opportunities. But I have to have a couple caveats first. One, to the extent I predict the future, I'll be wrong, as I think we almost always are, particularly the further out one goes. Second, I should disclose I'm a lawyer, not an engineer, which means my knowledge is very thin, but I've been trained to disguise that fact fairly well. And the third is, as Tom mentioned, I'm outside the industry now. I do serve on the entity that oversees the reliability of the electric system in the U.S. So I do have that role, but I'm not making the decisions, not wrestling with the hard decisions. So it's sort of easy to pontificate when you don't have to decide. So what's happening? In the late 1990s, early 2000s, those of you around, there was a huge debate about deregulation in Wisconsin, moving to a competitive market. We called it retail wheeling at the time. And that didn't happen. A number of us opposed that. But the drivers were really utilities seeking deregulation. There wasn't any major technological change pushing the industry as happened with telecom, where there was huge technological changes. And we would have ended up, in my view, with a system where everybody was getting their power out of the same large units they were getting out of before, but without a price regulation cap. Very little competition because we had the weakest transmission system in the Midwest at that point. So the competitors from outside would not have been able to get in, essentially. And the state, I think fairly wisely, didn't make that move. California did, went through havoc, but has emerged. And states did deregulate to the east of us. What we're seeing now is change that has a number of drivers, and those drivers are not utilities seeking deregulation. There are a number of other factors which are leading us to a much lower carbon generating system over time, much less reliance on fossil fuel, and a much more dispersed generation system. You know, we came together in the 50s and 60s with large central station units, transmission system, and integrated grid because of economies of scale. We moved away from diverse generation where towns had their hydro unit or their diesel unit, and generation was located close to load. Ironically, we're moving a bit back to the pre-1950s direction. So what are we seeing? Lots of coal retirements occurring now and on the horizon, a lot less use of coal. Nobody building a coal plant that I know of in the last 5 years in the U.S. except for the attempt down in Alabama to build one with capture CO2 and sequestering it. And on that unit, the price keeps going. I just saw it was a $70 million increase last week. So I don't think we're going to see a lot more of those in the near term. Much more efficient, highly efficient gas units, combined cycle gas units that can be run around the clock rather than simply during peak times as gas was more traditionally used. Very significant growth in renewable generation, both at the customer site and at the utility level, for primarily wind and solar, although some biomass. But that's dispersed. I mean, it's much stronger in some places, locations, in some states than others. And another factor which may not be as apparent is a big increase in demand response. That is in customers coming into the market and reducing their power consumption for compensation, and therefore reducing what has to be supplied, not only in emergency situations, but in higher cost situations when there is ample power out there. That's really important for the industry because up until not too long ago, it's an industry characterized by virtually no price elasticity. And what that means is when supply is short, prices go absolutely through the roof because demand doesn't respond by reducing itself. And that created, well, California energy crisis is a great example of problems with price elasticity. So that's a really big change. And then, of course, customers. Customers are looking to and installing on-site generation much more rapidly than they have in the past. And we're seeing developments like microgrids, which are essentially self-contained electric systems at an industrial park or a large apartment building in a city, perhaps a neighborhood, where that area can be separated from the grid and has generation and can sustain itself when the grid is not functioning, or when it's less expensive to do that than it is to purchase through the grid. These changes are being led on the coast, which is also not unusual. So California, New York, Texas on wind, and then Hawaii, which is all coast, I guess. They're not being led by Wisconsin. Not sure what our energy or electric policy is. I haven't heard it enunciated in any fashion recently. But I think the state has to wrestle with the issue of it is probably wise not necessarily to go first and to learn from what's happening elsewhere on the edge. Usually that's a smart strategy in this sort of situation. But there's also the problem of waiting too long and then ending up with a whole lot of cost to catch up or be behind the 8 ball. Let you make your judgment as to where you think we are when I finish. But the issue of fighting inevitable change is usually not a good strategy. That said, I'd also say I think the rate of change, if you read some of the press, is overstated. There is a question of how far solar penetration will go at the residential customer level. What's the limit? Both for economic reasons, interests, there's a whole lot of other issues, microgrids. I live in Bailey's Harbor, Wisconsin. I don't expect to see a microgrid in the near term or the long term. And then you read a lot about the death spiral of electric utilities. I wouldn't bet on a farm on that one either. I think the grid, transmission grid, tremendous investment out there, large central station units that provide base load capacity are going to be there for quite a while. And they are intended to be there and expected to be there under the Clean Power Plan. The plan does not predict the retirement of all coal-fired generation. It relies heavily on gas-fired generation. So what are the drivers of change? I think a major driver is state energy policies, where policymakers recognize the science of climate change and feel an obligation to address climate through energy policy. And so you're seeing California just went to a 50% renewable energy requirement by 2030. That's really a real stretch requirement. If you go back 10 years, I don't think anybody would be predicting that there would be that kind of a requirement or that the system could handle it. They were at a 33% requirement, which a lot of people thought was stretch until earlier this year. And they also imposed a 50% requirement on increasing building efficiency, residential, commercial, and industrial, by 2030, which is to be enforceable. I don't understand fully how it works, but major change. New York is leading the way in rethinking how the distribution function is going to work to facilitate distributed energy resources and what the role of the distribution company is going to be, and how that a lot of people think that's where the real action is in terms of technology development in the future. But they also have a 50% renewable energy policy. It's a state policy goal, I believe, rather than legislation by 2030. You got to remember, though, they do have Niagara Falls, so they've got a little bit of a leg up there. But they're also facing customer demand because of Hurricane Sandy and related and other storms, where people are really interested in having on-site generation for reliability purposes, mainly distribution system reliability purposes, as opposed to the bulk system, and that is feeding the fuel of change. Hawaii, 100% renewable requirement by 2045, adopted this year. I've read that 8 out of 10 homes, is probably 1 out of 8, excuse me, probably greater now, already have solar on their roofs. But they're competing with oil. They're brought in by ship. So the economics is quite a bit different. So each of those situations does differ from Wisconsin. California obviously has better solar potential. But Minnesota, our neighbor, is at 26.5% renewable requirement by 2025 for investor-owned utilities. I think it's 25 for munis, and 31.5 for Northern States Power Company, the largest utility up there. And that's by 2025. They do have a better wind resource than Wisconsin does, but not all that much better. And so they're much more similar to us. Wisconsin has a 10% requirement by this year, which was fulfilled, I think, last year or a little even earlier. It was adopted, I believe, in 2005, and there has been no change since then. We rejected moving to 25% by 2025 when the Clean Energy Jobs Act failed in 2009. And we've added significant coal-fired generation in the last, in 2007 through 2009, almost 2,000 megawatts, somewhat shy of that, which is different than almost any other state out there. So our trajectory is definitely different. We did go through a process with a global warming task force under Governor Doyle that I co-chaired with Tia Nelson. There's several people here that were involved in that. Came to a series of recommendations, I think over 60, with a very high degree of consensus. All the utilities agreed with all the environmental groups. Not sure what they were smoking, but it was an unusual situation. But those recommendations came together. They would have, I think, put us in a better position to face, I know they would have, the Clean Power Plan. But the bottom line is they were essentially rejected by policymakers in that they did not adopt them. So state policy is big, not federal energy, environmental policy is another major driver of change. And there it's not just the Clean Power Plan. You've got MATS, the mercury neurotoxics regulation, currently in court, but a lot of utilities have moved out on the assumption that they need to comply and make decisions with respect to the refurbishment or retirement of coal units. And the cross-state air pollution rule is also in effect and has had that impact. So we have already seen retirement of 21 gigawatts of older small coal units in between 2012 and 2014. That's really significant if you would compare that number with the past. Under the Clean Power Plan, there's an expectation of a retirement of another 27 gigawatts of coal-fired generation. To take it all together, that's more than a third of what's out there. Other plants that would remain are expected to be run less, considerably less than in the past. So the federal policy would be a driver for Wisconsin, assuming that these regulations are upheld by the courts. But for California, not really. If you look at California, there's not much opposition to the Clean Power Plan because it's not, their own state requirements are more stringent. The important point, though, I think to make is that the changes that I generally outlined at the beginning are happening regardless of state and federal policy. In other words, there are drivers beyond that which are leading us in exactly the same direction. Key is the price of gas. The price of natural gas has decreased dramatically, and it is way out of whack with the projections that were made 10 years ago. We're looking at $3 gas, and I'm not sure what it is today, but when we thought we were going to face $10 to $15 gas. That has a huge impact on what utilities are doing, how power plants are run, and on our carbon. It also has had an impact which is negative to reducing carbon, even though gas has less than coal. And that is that gas prices are forcing, or not forcing, but incenting the retirement of nuclear units before the end of their license life and their useful life. And when you take a nuclear unit out of service, as I'll show later, you lose a tremendous amount, proportionally, of low carbon energy, given the fact that they operate around the clock at almost 100% capacity factor. But nuclear units that are competing in competitive wholesale markets are losing money when they get paid the gas price as the marginal cost of energy. Another major factor in change, in driving the change, is risk. Utilities are risk adverse, and they are smart business people. A coal unit takes 8 years to build and has a huge capital cost associated with it. Say a nuclear is even more dramatic in terms of the high capital cost and probably takes 10 to 12 years to build. We did that in the past because of the promise of a low, stable energy cost. But with gas prices as low as they are, that promise is no longer quite as attractive. And the risk of having all that capital extended and not knowing what the future is going to look like in 8 to 10 years means people aren't building those plants and are not going to build those plants, because you can build a gas plant in 3 years for a much lower capital cost, and the projections are you're going to have low fuel prices for the foreseeable future. Makes a huge difference. Now, of course, environmentally, that's driven by fracking, which has its own challenges associated with it. So, but that's what's happened. And then, of course, the huge decline in the cost of solar panels is another major driver, making it economic and in some places quite competitive with existing forms of generation, which was certainly not true 5 years ago. To the point where the subsidies may no longer be tax subsidies even necessary. Same is true with wind, where we're seeing a huge, big development, particularly in Texas. The other and the final thing I'll mention, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is customer desire. Ultimately, the industry will respond to what customers want. And we're seeing customers wanting more cleaner energy, we're seeing them wanting more control, and we're seeing them wanting generation located close to load or at their load many times to address reliability issues. Interesting example, I think was mentioned earlier, was Madison Gas and Electric, which a year and a half ago was in a major controversy over imposing high fixed costs for residential customers, which was seen as discouraging solar and conservation. They ran into a lot of opposition, consulted with their customers, and have now come out with a very aggressive plan, which I think is there regardless of the Clean Power Plan. It's what they see is a good business decision for them and what their customers want. 25% renewables by 25, 30 by 30, and a significant 40% reduction in carbon. And then on the edge, what we keep reading about in the papers is the development of energy storage, which has the potential for being a huge game changer in our industry. Large-scale commercial storage is not there yet. There's a lot of pilot projects, there's a lot of work being done in development, but the potential value is very clear, I think, and you're going to see a lot more action in that direction, which will just accelerate to the extent it's successful, the changes that are occurring. I'm going to talk, though, a little bit about the challenges of these changes. But before that, I want to mention there are, of course, benefits. I mean, the reduction in carbon is a significant benefit, not only for mitigating climate change, but also because of the co-benefits with respect to human health in terms of asthma, respiratory disease, heart disease, particularly from the older coal units that are out there. I should say the newer ones, the ones that were built in, went into service about 2008 down at Elm Road and at Weston, and we were a partial owner on the utility. I ran the partial owner of the Elm Road units, are dramatically cleaner on all pollutants than the existing units, and as a matter of fact, I don't think require any changes because of the proposed regs. They do, of course, emit a lot of CO2. But retiring older coal units has a tremendous amount of benefit. And I'd also speculate some utilities are not really opposed to that, because if they're almost fully depreciated, they're not making much money on them. They make more money on new units. The other obvious factor, or not obvious, but factor that a lot of people are looking at is that there can be improvements in reliability by having generation closer to load and having more smaller units than huge units. Because when you have some really huge units and you look at your contingencies, You have to take out the largest unit to see what happens. You need reserves in place to replace that unit, and then you go to N-2 and take out the next biggest element to see what you have to do. And that requires some significant construction of facilities for reliability purposes. So over time, the dispersed generation is likely, I think, to provide additional reliability. There are some concerns about the Internet of Things and the cyber issues. Oops. Through all the potential points of entry, but that's an issue that has got to be addressed regardless. Getting to the challenges, there are significant concerns with respect to maintaining the reliability of the system as we make this transition. And I have to say that the guys that are sitting in the operations centers of the utilities and at the MISO in Indiana are really concerned about maintaining reliability. The political cost of an unreliable system is dramatic. Customers are extremely sensitive to outages and are extremely intolerant of reliability problems. And so maintaining that reliability is what they really care about. They know how to do it. Their record is really very, very good, if you look at it percentage-wise, with the existing system that they know and how it operates. But when you introduce a lot of variable generation, those issues change. They have to adapt. That doesn't mean that they can't, and it doesn't mean that they won't, and a reliable system is certainly possible, but rapid change and transitions are messy and create angst. So if we look, see if I can do this. This is a load curve on a peak summer day, and you see what you would expect. The load ramps up early in the morning as businesses start to operate, peaks around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then starts coming in. And so the operators layer in the generation under this, and they'll be turning on gas peakers or whatever at this time. This is at the same time, same day, the same hour, the wind generation availability in the Midwest system operator. And what does a power system operator look at this? He doesn't like it, or she doesn't like it. Wind is going down exactly when they need to ramp up the system. They're losing it. It stays down and it's somewhat erratic during the day when they're fighting to keep the load on. Remember, this is a peak day, so this is a stress time. And then it starts to go up again when they don't need it, because it's stronger in the off-peak hours. So what you can see here is, and it's not controlled, whereas they can control the other types of generation. And they'll have a couple of units that are responding automatically to the changes in load, because they've got to keep it in balance on a second-by-second basis between the load and the demand. So you can also see the potential for storage. If you can take the energy here when you don't need it and move it over here, level that off and take it from here, that is very attractive. Now, I should say that, there's a lot of work that's been done with wind it is more controllable now. They can ramp it down when there's too much of it, but they can't increase it when there isn't. And they are installing voltage control and frequency control devices, which are very important because frequency and voltage have been maintained by the large central station units that are there, that are providing that support to the system. As you get less and less of those, then you get concerned about whether you can maintain voltage and frequency. If you can't maintain frequency, motors are going to burn out all over the place, and units will automatically shut down. So those two factors are really of concern to operators. There's a tremendous amount of work going on to make sure that this can happen. And in some ways, I can say we can be grateful that California or Hawaii is wrestling with this first, and we can learn from how they deal with it. And it's leading to a concept called essential reliability services, where entities will provide voltage control devices closer to load, synchronous condensers, and other things that will take the place of some of the large central station units. So it's possible. And they increase prices. My experience is when you unbundle services that cost $1, you find out the components when you add them up cost $1.50. So you have to be careful of that in the rate process. On the solar side, this is an infamous duck curve from California. And this again is a load curve. It's in March, so it's a shoulder month. And you can see this is the actual curve operators were dealing with in 2012. I'm not sure why they peak as much as they do in that season and that evening, but they do. And the operators were able to deal with that. 2013 is going down. 2014 is a projection based on the increased renewable capacity, particularly solar, under their requirements. And you can see by 2020, they're projecting, or have been projecting, a dramatic drop during the daytime. Well, what you have is solar coming on at 9 a.m. and dropping like a stone around 5 in the afternoon. And the operator has got to then get other generation online to keep the lights on. And that is a really steep ramp. So now this has not happened, but this is what their projection was, and what's driving them to find ways to have the duck spread its wings and level that load during the day. Because this, if they really had to face this, would be a significant reliability issue. So a lot of work going on there, but it tells you what has to be addressed in order to make a new system work. The other challenges associated with changes that are going on is one of them. It's very significant, I think, is how much the flight to gas is really going to be. If all the big systems replace all of the coal-fired generation that they're taking out with gas, that's going to create a significant dependency on one fuel. And it's going to require significant additional pipeline capacity to be built. And there's a question as to whether that capacity can be built in the time frame required to comply with the Act. And gas is particularly difficult because when you really need it is going to be in the winter, and winter peaks, and there you're competing with home heating. And it just doesn't work to curtail one and not the other, because you need electric fans to pump, to disperse the air from furnaces. So it's, they're dependent. We're finding in New England today, if you read the reliability reports out there, that they're facing significant risk in extremely cold weather, that there will not have enough gas to run the generation there, given the priority for home heating, because you've got two things going on. You've got utilities building gas-fired generation without new pipeline capacity coming in as quickly, and two, homes converting from oil to gas, natural gas, fairly rapidly. So they're experimenting, leading the way on a lot of actions to try to address that issue. Including market incentives. So again, we can learn from that. And the nuclear issue is they're facing out there, because we had Kewanee retire because it couldn't compete in the market. There are two, one in New York and one in New England, large nuclear units that look like they're coming out now. And what that does is force greater change as a result of the Clean Power Plan earlier than would otherwise occur. On the wind side, the challenge is transmission. Solar has an advantage because it can be done usually closer to load. Now, there's some big projects in the West that are not, but transmission, there's a lot of wind capability to the west of us. And Department of Energy did a study I was involved in a few years ago, and that study showed that to meet carbon requirements, you could build a huge amount of wind in the Dakotas, Nebraska, western Minnesota, Kansas, and move it east. But to move it east, we had to project building 5 direct current DC high voltage transmission lines, plus a whole lot of other transmission. Well, it takes 8 to 10 years to build a transmission line like that. And unlike pipelines, which are federally sited, the transmission is state-sited. So you've got to go through each state and get approval and face the opposition in each state to get it built. I think some people believe without a law change it would be impossible to build those DC lines because they would go through some states that wouldn't get any benefit from the line because they're delivering power further east. So that's an issue, and to the extent states start relying on importing large amounts of wind in their plans, can the transmission be in place to make that really work? And what happens if it's not? Other changes that are related include business model changes. I mean, utilities are facing significant challenges as they see these changes occurring in determining how are they going to make money in the future? How are they going to grow their business if they're not going to be building putting very large amounts of steel in the ground? Who's going to own, maintain, and control distributed energy resources? Are they going to be able to have a role in that, or are they going to be excluded? One thing you can say for sure is they're going to be in fights with third-party providers over that issue. And so they have to figure out, are they going to facilitate change and try to co-opt or gain a place in that development, or are they going to try to retard change through various strategies? And that's a major challenge. Regulators face a lot of challenge. Is monopoly service going to be eroded, the regulatory compact? In Wisconsin, I think people would argue that if you had a company like Solar City come in and put and own solar on a lot of roofs, that they would become a regulated utility in Wisconsin under the law. They would certainly disagree with that. And so commissions are going to have to sort that out. They're going to have to sort out the fixed charge issue, which has been very controversial in Wisconsin. At the risk of being shot, I think it's a gray area. I think you can make arguments on both sides. There are fixed costs that are there that have to be recovered. There are customers with renewable who are relying on backup from the utility, and backup is not free. On the other hand, if you impose a high fixed charge, you're discouraging conservation and efficiency, which is clearly not in the public interest, and you're discouraging the development of low carbon resources. So there's a whole set of issues there that have to be worked out. We're going to continue to see certainly regulation on the transmission and distribution side, and how you structure that with the correct incentives is really a really important issue going forward. You also have a fight between federal and state regulation over demand response. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission sees that as a part of the wholesale market and wants companies to be able to bid in and get compensated like generators for taking load off the system. It's in the Supreme Court. A number of states are saying, wait a minute, that's retail-related service, it's ours. And then there are others going in saying the value is not the same as generation. So a lot of issues out there, and as I said earlier, the transition is definitely going to be messy, interesting, and lucrative for lawyers and consulting engineers. The other issue out there long term is we have over 100 nuclear power plants in the country. Most of them expire, their licenses expire in 2030 and 2040. Many of them, the licenses have been extended so they'd already be 60 years old at that point in time. and likely to be retired. Constructing a new nuclear unit is astronomically expensive. There are a couple of utilities trying to do it in the South, experiencing big cost increases. And so what happens when all that low carbon energy goes out of the system in terms of meeting 2050 goals? It takes an awful lot of wind at a 35% capacity factor to replace a nuclear unit at 100% capacity factor. In other words, it's generating, the wind unit is only producing energy 35% of the hours in the day or the year, whereas the nuclear is doing it around the clock. So you need a lot more of it to get the same amount of energy. That's a challenge. So I'm going to conclude by talking a little bit about where Wisconsin is on carbon and what we face in connection with the Clean Power Plan or reducing carbon in any event. I should say, you know, that it's interesting. The Clean Power Plan will be in litigation for years, as all the EPA regulations apparently are. There is a real benefit to legislation. You see that California passes the law is the law, you can't sue, or you won't be successful. And you can make a decision and move forward. And that certainty is really of great value to the utilities and others in the industry, rather than dealing with uncertainty for long periods of time, which is what we are faced with. So that tells you, you know, if we had a Congress that would deal with a cap and trade or a carbon tax, it would be, I view, a far safer and more efficient way to proceed. So this is just showing you Wisconsin's carbon emissions by sector. Utilities, transportation, industry, commercial, probably buildings, and residential buildings. And in Wisconsin, we're about 40% of our carbon is coming from utilities, which is from electric, which is higher than the national average. But the interesting thing when we did the task force is that we were looking at 2005 data, the highest that had occurred. And that was the data that was available. And the projections were that carbon's just going to go like that. What happened? Carbon has been reduced. And that's not because of policy, because we don't have a policy. It's because of market forces and other factors that I'll mention. But what you see is the electric has come down, 2012 down very considerably. You see a jump in 2013, which I'll get into. Part of that is the polar vortex. And you can see residential went up and electric utilities went up primarily. The others are pretty stable. But we had a really dramatic reduction by 2012. And again, you see that it's electric utilities going down very significantly. So what's going on? This is the fuel types used by the electric utilities in the, I don't know if you can see it in the years below. And what you see in 2012 is a dramatic change in that 1 year period. You see electric generation down dramatically, gas-fired generation up significantly. The nukes are up a little bit, and I suspect that's because the prior year, one of them was out of service for extended outage, which they do every 18 months or so. Otherwise, you see a gradual increase in renewables. Hydro, it just depends on whether it's a good water year or a bad water year. We don't have reservoirs, so it's just run of the river. So it's really gas and coal that's driving. And then you see the increase in 2013, and then somewhat of a decrease in 2014. Well, what's happening? This is gas prices. Look at 2012, the absolute bottom compared to what we were dramatically below the levels we were seeing back in 2007 and 2008. Well, that drop in gas prices corresponds just about exactly with the increase in gas generation and the decrease in coal. And that's because the utilities dispatch on an economic basis. They use the lowest cost resource available, and against all expectations, gas, it was cheaper to run some gas units than it was to run some coal units. And we had a significant drop in carbon. What that tells you is that price matters a lot. And if you had a significant carbon tax, you would find gas advantaged because it's about, you can argue about this, but about 50% of the amount of carbon than coal for the equivalent amount of generation. Coal would be significantly disadvantaged. You'd see the dispatch change, and you'd see carbon lower. So what's going on in 2013 and 2014? Well, if you look at 2013, the nuclear has gone down fairly significantly. Gas has gone down also, and coal has gone up. So if we go over to the gas price thing, what you see is that you had a spike on gas prices in 2014. So those units that were cheaper to run because they were gas-fired the year before, coal-fired units were beating them, and you saw an increase in coal generation. Nationwide, coal generation went up about 5% because of this change. In Wisconsin, however, coal generation went up almost 25%. And the reason for that? We retired the nuclear unit at Kewanee in April or May of 2013. So you had 7 to 8 months without that unit. Because gas prices had gone up, it was all filled in by coal. So the other lesson is nuclear matters in terms of your emission. So so now it's particularly puzzling that 2014, the coal usage was down somewhat. But Kewanee was off for a full year in 2014. So what's driving that? This is another way to look at it. This is a similar graph. You can see exactly the same thing in 2012. The coal going down dramatically, gas going up. You can see the coal rising again the next year. And then you see 2014, and the coal dispatch is down. Nuclear is down. Gas hasn't done much. And the renewables are gained somewhat, but are about the same. Well, what happened is that there were coal units, some large ones in Wisconsin, were out of service during the year for major refurbishments to comply with environmental regulations. So those units were not available. Nuclear was down, but then if you look at the top, this is the amount of energy generated. We generated a lot less energy than we did in the prior. And that's why you see the drop occur. But did the load go down? No. We had as much load in that year as in the prior year, basically. What's happening is we're bringing in energy from other states to replace the coal-fired generation. I would say that's a proxy for the value of conservation. If you were to reduce your load by that much, or the amount of generation to meet your load, you can see that you can reduce your carbon significantly. It's also a proxy for the possibility of trading emissions credits in the Clean Power Act, that if you can get energy through credits from resources in other states that are low carbon, you can also reduce the state's requirements. So where are we headed? This is kind of interesting. Wisconsin's generation mix in 2014, compared to those other states I mentioned, 62% coal, 13% gas, 15% nuclear, down from 22. Wind and biomass about 2.5, hydro about 3.5, solar 0. So statistically, we obviously have some solar, but the bottom line is statistically it's negligible. So we have a long way to go potentially. And so where do we have to go? This is the Clean Power Plan requirement, And as you can see, if we were going from 2012, we'd have a lot less to do, but we're not. So we have some significant reductions, 26% by 2022 and 39% by 2030. And that's got to be done by replacing coal with gas, increasing renewables, making the coal-fired units more efficient so they do less CO2 per amount of generation that comes out. But the other clear factor out there is conservation. The more you conserve and efficient, the lower you get the load down, the less you have to do, and the less expensive you have to do. Less expensive it will be. Tom asked, what can businesses out there do? And my answer is conserve. There is absolutely no downside to conservation and efficiency. If rates go up, you can still control your bill by using less power. You make a clear benefit to the environment. Less has to be built. And I really can't see any downside to that. So I would do as much as possible in that regard. If you're going to put in, the other factor, if you're going to put in local generation of your own solar or whatever, just be careful when you're dealing with a reputable entity. Test their assumptions and what they're telling you. Make sure you know all the equipment you need to have and understand how the rate, how it's going to affect your costs in the interplay with the utilities rates that you're dealing with and their interconnection requirements. So that is the end.
Are you open to taking some questions?
Easy one.
Easy one. Only easy questions.
Sure.
Although Wisconsin policymakers have been opposed to increasing our renewable dependence, what incentives do you see to build electric transmission through the renewable energies to bring to Wisconsin?
Incentives to build transmission?
To bring renewables specifically to Wisconsin.
Right.
To lower demand on fossil.
Well, the Midwest System Operator has plans that include building significant transmission for that reason. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has been what I would describe as very liberal on transmission rates of return. If you look at the investments that Wisconsin utilities have made, probably the best investment they've made is in the American Transmission Company, which is, realizes significant return for them, which got transmission built in this state, which is a good thing because we had a very weak system. So I think there are incentives out there to build. I think the real issue is not the economics, it's siting. And getting transmission sited through Minnesota to bring a lot of wind power to Wisconsin, kind of a tough road to hoe in some respects. I think everybody's ready to go home.
Well, I think they're actually ready to drink. So, thank you, Ray. So we made it through the day. Was it a good day? Good. So, if it was a good day, then it was so all the credit goes to the team of students that put this together. So let's have them come up here. Okay, so I'm going to ask each of them just for 1 minute, tell you about who they are, where they're from, what they're majoring in, so you get a sense of.
She's still undecided. My name's Tony Nelson. I am a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm studying mining policy, which I hope to take back to my home state in Alaska.
I sort of feel like I'm at a beauty pageant. They're asking me that one question at the very end. But my name is Mallory Palmer. I am a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Environmental Conservation Professional Master's Program. I'm originally from Poynette, Wisconsin. Love this state and want to stay here. So thank you.
My name is Matt Melvin. I'm a junior at UW-Madison studying chemical engineering and business, and I'm hoping to go to graduate school after graduating next year and maybe pursue something in microfluidics or surface science.
My name is Jenna Huey, and I'm a sophomore at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm double majoring in marketing and environmental studies at the moment, which in my mind equals business sustainability. And I'm from Milwaukee.
So the conference, I mean, it really is, it's a tribute to the hard work of them, because I couldn't do all the work that they do. I'll tell you that they all volunteered to do this. I mean, there's 40 students in my class, and first day of class, I gave them a whole list of projects and warned them that if you choose the conference, it's going to be a lot more work than any of the other projects. And they all said, yeah, that's what we want to do. So now they get the pleasure of writing the paper for the next generation of students next year to tell them, here's really what the story is like and the experience is like. So let's give them one more round of applause. So 2 quick reminders. One, we are heading over to the Alumni and Welcome Center. Some of you may have parked over there. When you walk out the building on the Algoma side, you're going to your kind of left and across. So you're going down to the next block, and it's a little bit to the left, and you see a big sign that says Alumni and Welcome Center. And they've got drinks that we're covering, and they've got hors d'oeuvres, and so we'll be there from 4 to 5 is what we were told them. So do take advantage of the opportunity to continue to network. And then the last thing that I'll mention to you is that your name tags all are easily, they come off really easily. If you're going to the Alumni and Welcome Center, keep them. If you are not, leave them on the table where you registered. We'll take names out, we'll recycle them for next year. It's much more sustainable than those plastic things that you throw away at other conferences. Thank you all so much for sticking around, for coming up to Oshkosh, for celebrating the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and the great things that they've accomplished. And we'll see you all next year. Thank you.